Yo, what's up guys? Cove here today. Welcome back to a brand new video. Chances are if you clicked on this video, you either did it for two reasons. First off, you're interested in buying potentially a 4,1 Mac Pro or a 5,1 Mac Pro, or you're just interested in the Mac Pro. I really don't know, but you clicked on this video, so thank you for clicking it. That really helps me out, and I appreciate it. But anyways, should you buy this Mac Pro? Well, probably not is the short answer. In the long term, yeah, maybe. We'll talk about that. So before we get into this video, we're going to talk about a few things about considering if you should buy a machine like this or not. So number one is setting it up and getting it to a point where it's actually like kind of usable. And then we're going to talk about, how usable actually is it once it's completely set up. And let me tell you, I've got a few things to say about either one. Why you might want to do it, might not want to do it. So number one, let's talk about the setup. So a setup of a machine like this is actually kind of a pain. Like, it's a big pain in the A. Let me just explain it that way. It's not easy. What you'll do is you'll go on YouTube and you'll see all these really nice people, and they're really smart guys, like, Mac Sound Solutions, Luke Miani, all these people, right? And they will talk to you about how this machine is super great. And how, especially if you're like a video editor or you want to be a YouTuber kind of like I am, one of these machines for like $300 is amazing, right? And they're not technically wrong. It is a good machine, but it's kind of bad. Like, it's kind of bad in 2023. Like, especially in the setting up. Like, you have the usability of the machine after it's set up, but when you're setting up the machine, it is a nightmare. First off, if you have a 4,1 Mac Pro like me, you probably want to do the EFI firmware update to make it a 5,1. And what this will allow you to do is use newer graphics cards, newer processors, and it'll allow you to run macos Mojave natively, as well as use stuff like OpenCore to get even past macos Mojave and get, like, the newest Ventura or something like that. It really doesn't matter. I mean, it opens you up to a bunch of possibilities, correct? Well, getting that installed, at least for me, was quite a hassle. So first off, without it, you can't even install macos Mojave or High Sierra. You can only install up to El Capitan or lower. And so what you have to do is you have to get macOS El Capitan onto the machine. Now, if you're lucky, what happens is you buy a machine like this, it'll come with a hard drive with El Capitan installed, and then there's this tool you can run, and then you can run the EFI firmware update and make it a 5,1. And then you can use newer graphics cards and stuff, right? Well, for me, it wasn't that simple. See, I got a machine that had High Sierra installed. I don't know how they did that without the firmware update, but somehow they did. But anyways, I kind of put a new SSD in there, and so when I tried to install High Sierra because I thought it was compatible, it just didn't work. So I don't know what they did to trick it, but what you had to do is then I was like, okay, I'll just install El Capitan and run the updater. Well, great, if it actually works. So the problem is that Apple makes it super, super difficult to make a macOS El Capitan USB installer. I mean, there's a whole web page dedicated to making macOS installers on USBs. It's great, but they don't really make it easy to install macOS El Capitan. It's not that there's not documentation out there on the web page not to do it, but what happens is you need to download on another Mac an installer for, El Capitan or whatever your macOS version is and run a command in your terminal. Well, for me, the only other Mac I have is a MacBook, and it runs the newest Ventura. So when I tried to get El Capitan installer, it would just say my Mac's too old and it wouldn't download. I mean, I made Sierra installers and High Sierra installers, and they install just fine, and I can still run the command. So I don't know why macOS El Capitan is different, but it really sucked. So what you ended up having to do is I had to install macOS Snow Leopard, and the only way I was able to get that to work is by getting one of these, which is this is a Mac box set, but pretty much it comes with, right there, macOS Snow Leopard, and it's a disc that you can insert into the machine. And actually what I did is I just went onto archive.org and I literally just downloaded the ISO and put that on a USB for Snow Leopard. So it was all completely fine, but just to make sure I wasn't pirating anything, I got this, but it's all good, right? Anyways, once I was there, I could then upgrade to El Capitan, and that had its own issues too, but it was good enough to where I could at least get installed. Anyways, I ran the tool, it ran just fine. And then after that, hey, was the setup done? Well, no. No, it wasn't. Because then I needed to install a new graphics card. So this is the graphics card it comes with. At least mine came with. You will probably get an AMD card like this. There's a few different ones. Some come with like NVIDIA GT120s, but it doesn't matter. What the whole point is that to make this usable in 2023, graphics cards like this, Radeon HD 4650 or something like that, they just kind of suck. And to get any real work done, this is not your ticket out. And the other thing is, even if you wanted to use this, you can't install macOS Mojave or higher because it requires a metal supported GPU, which this isn't. So that's kind of a problem. What you need to do is any AMD card, even the brand new ones like the RX 6800 XT in the 6000 series lineup, they all just work. You know, they work right out of the box. I ended up going with an RX 580. That's probably the most popular choice. It's definitely an older card, but it's still very, very good, and they still support it today with macOS. And if you want to do Team Green, which is NVIDIA cards, you're kind of out of luck unless you want to run as high as a GTX 1080 on macOS High Sierra or lower. So I guess you can do it, but good luck, I guess, because you're not going to be running very new versions of software. Anyways, I ended up going on eBay and I bought an RX 580. And it was all good, right? Well, no, it wasn't. I got an RX 580 2048 SP. And it's probably my fault because I ordered it from China because it was cheaper, but I'm a cheapskate, right? Anyways, the 2048 SP is a weird version of the RX 580 from China, so it just didn't work in my Mac at all, and that really sucked. But I'm not going to blame that on the Mac Pro because that's just how AMD is, and it's actually more like an RX 570 plus, not a real RX 580. But anyways, I went back, ordered a genuine RX 580 Nitro Plus from Sapphire, and that seemed to do the trick. But there's an issue. Once you upgrade the graphics card from the original, which is not this, so anything besides this, what happens is there's a problem where you can't see the boot screen or you can't access the boot picker with a GPU like that. So when you turn this thing on, you get a black screen for about 20 to 30 seconds, and then it just kind of shows up at the lock screen or the login screen, right? It's not the worst thing in the world because once you get it functional like mine is, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's kind of annoying because you don't really know what the heck is going on, but fine, you know, it works. But it kind of sucks when you're trying to upgrade. So what I ended up doing is to get macOS Mojave installed, I could have gone from El Capitan and just upgraded my way all the way up to Mojave, but it was having issues, probably because it was like a really old version. And so what I ended up doing is I made a Mojave, sorry, not a Mojave, a High Sierra USB, and then what I could do is once from there, I could just install macOS Mojave because I can't install macOS Mojave directly because it requires a metal supported GPU, and because I can't access the bootloader to boot into that macOS Mojave USB with the RX 580 installed, there was no way I could install it. Again, annoyances, right? So pretty much what happened is I installed it, and again, it asked for an EFI firmware update. Another one, you know, not the one just to make it from a 4.1 to a 5.1, but it asked for another update. Fine. But because I had the RX 580 installed at that point on High Sierra, so I could actually upgrade, I couldn't see where it was for about 15 minutes, because they take forever to install the EFI firmware updates. After that, I installed macOS Mojave just fine, actually surprisingly. It was kind of sketchy because you didn't really see what you were doing half the time, but it got to this point, and it was all fine. But the point I'm trying to make is, like, it's not very Apple. Like, it's an Apple computer. It technically can run stuff, but just to get up to macOS Mojave, it was like a 3.5 day process off and on. Like, the thing is that most people aren't going to just have 3 days of their life that they can blow on this thing. You know, they have work to do, they got school, whatever. And if this thing ever breaks again, I'm going to have to slot this card back in so I can just get it back to this state. So it's just kind of a nightmare to set this thing up and actually install OSs. And if you want to do something like OpenCore, that's even worse because now what it does is in theory, it should help you because it'll have a third party bootloader and stuff. But I just, it's a lot of work. And the thing is, once you get installed, when you want to update Mac OS, let's say I install Ventura and a new version of it comes out, you have to upgrade OpenCore. So it's like, yeah, it kind of works, but not really. So I've just left mine on Mojave. And the thing is, if you're a technical nerd, like a lot of those guys on YouTube, and you guys know what you're doing, and you guys are awesome, by the way, those people that on the internet that do that, that's great. But for the typical person that would probably buy this machine as a cheap editing rig, it's kind of a miserable process. So that's why I didn't do it. I'm sure I could with enough YouTube support and help, but hey. So anyways, that's kind of how setting up this machine goes. You can install Windows on this machine, but dual booting with Mac OS is going to be kind of hard because Boot Camp doesn't really work. In fact, when I boot it up on Mac OS Mojave, it just doesn't seem, it just says it's unsupported, like Boot Camp doesn't work. And so, yeah, you can install it independently, and I have done that before. It seems to run fine. You can make it a $300 ghetto gaming PC and throw like an RX 580 in it. It'd be all good. And so that's all fine, but it's just kind of something you need to know. And the other thing is that with macOS Mojave, there's a lot of things that don't work. So we'll talk about this when it comes to the usability, but stuff like, your Wi-Fi and your Bluetooth, it does not work. At the corner right here, actually, it's hard to see, but it just has an X by the Wi-Fi logo. And the only reason I have internet is because my room is hardwired with Ethernet. So it's not a big deal for me, but for most people, it probably would. It's stuff like AirDrop, which is kind of important to me as a YouTube creator who films on the iPhone, really just sucks not to have. And so these are just a few of the things that you also are going to have to risk when you get something like this. So the thing is, what I was saying, it's not very Apple-like, is that, like, most Apple machines, they're plug and play. You plug the thing in, you set up Mac OS, the thing just kind of works. Like, it's not very, messing aroundy where you're always kind of messing with it to make it work. And that's why for 300 bucks, I'm not sure in terms of the setup if it might be worth it for some people. Because for 400, you can get a used M1 Mac Mini, which is probably just as powerful. I think this is slightly more powerful than a baseline M1 Mac. And for 600, you get an M2 Mac Mini. And it'd be a way easier and better experience, and it would be tiny. Like, this is a full desktop tower, which you can't see right now, but, an M1 Mac Mini is probably, I don't know, it's probably like this, but a little bit taller. So anyways, that's the setup. Oh, that's cool. But that's the setup pretty much. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's pretty bad. Like, I think most people would be genuinely frustrated. So anyways, let's get on to the usability, and then let's come back and let's actually talk about, should you actually buy this? But my opinion right now is, in terms of setup, probably no, unless you really know what you're doing.
Okay, so we're going to start about the usability in terms of gaming. So first off, note that I'm not going to be covering Windows. Windows is its own separate topic, and it is kind of a pain to set up. So we're just going to be talking about Mac OS and games that are specifically compatible with Mac OS Mojave or newer. And pretty much we're going to be starting off with some good old Minecraft. So as you can see here on screen, I'm running Minecraft with Optifine, and we're getting about 300 to about 350 FPS. And this is running on what I would call medium-ish settings. Like, I didn't take a picture of what the settings are, but it is running Optifine with the fast rendering and fast math enabled. So yeah, I will leave a little bit of gameplay up on screen, but as you can see, it is running pretty well. Once we got on the floor, we do get some dips. So here's what the settings look like. And we're about to turn it on to BSL shaders. So it can do shaders as well, and it does a pretty good job. Um, Once this loads, you're probably looking at about 70 to 80 FPS in most cases. So as you can see, this is running with Optifine. And honestly, Minecraft with shaders looks really gorgeous. And it runs really, really well. And this is on macOS. So imagine if you did run it with Windows, it'd probably run way, way better. As you can see, when you're flying, you're loading chunks in, it will go down to about 50 to 60 But yeah, overall, Minecraft, very, very playable. Alright, next up we have Slime Rancher. I downloaded this from the Epic Games Store. A problem with this computer in macOS Mojave and Mac gaming in general is there's just not a lot of games that will support macOS, especially this old of a macOS version. So that is one issue. I believe this is on all high and ultra settings. This is the highest it goes, and it was at least I say 50 to 60 plus FPS gaming experience. Obviously in Windows it would run well, but as you can see here, it seems to be doing really, really well. And anyways, guys, let's get on to the next game. Next game that we have is The Witness. So I'm running this on max settings, and it is from the Epic Games Store. And as you can see, it has a couple of stutters here and there, but it does seem to be running pretty well for the most part. So let me just find a place where it is where we're running around. So yeah, I'd say it's at least a 50 to 60 plus gaming experience, maybe a little less. It might dip down to about 45 or so. And note, guys, you can always down the settings or play on Windows. So yeah, let's get on to, I believe, what our last game is. Alright, so the last game that we were going to try was going to be Fortnite, and as you know, Fortnite has an issue with Epic, so Apple and Epic, that whole deal. But the game wouldn't launch, so I'm not going to be counting it. But yeah, it should have worked, but it's not. Alright, so now before we talk about the usage in terms of the video editing, let's talk about the general usage. Now, the most supported or most native supported version of macOS that this machine can run is macos Mojave. macos Mojave is quite a few years old at this point, so the current state in 2023 is stuff like Google Chrome is perfectly fine. This means stuff like Google Drive and Microsoft Office, all that's going to work. YouTube playback works all the way up to about 4K, except note that my screen capture makes it look laggy, but it plays in native 4K. But stuff like 8K is just not going to be doable. All the iMessage and stuff does work, but I have to be signed in for it to work. But pretty much also stuff like CapCut will work, which is my editor of choice. The problem is that there's a lot of programs nowadays that are starting to drop support, and including Google Chrome. And you might be wondering, okay, well, so what? Can't I just use Safari? Well, Safari hasn't gotten an update since 2021 for macOS Mojave. So while it might work today, what's not to say in about 6 months from now it might be a completely different story. And that is one of the things. Now, of course, if you want to use OpenCore, you can get around that. But that is just the current situation I personally see for this computer. So, is it usable? Yes, but who knows when application support is going to drop. So, anyways, on to the next part.
Okay, now we're going to be talking about the editing. So I am using CapCut, and actually this video that you're seeing right now, the entire production on YouTube is being edited with this Mac Pro. So as you can see, it seems to be doing pretty fine. If I play it, it seems to scrub just fine, and if I click play, it will just go. Now this is with CapCut. Now the thing is to know is that stuff like DaVinci Resolve is no longer compatible, so you will have to get an update or something to move on. But as you can see, this is perfectly fine. If you're wondering why the background looks like the El Capitan background, it's because I changed it. But I am running a 2.5K 144 hertz display. It's actually a gaming monitor, but it's running just fine, and it's running with an RX 580, and it's all good. So I'm just gonna say generally, like as a video editing rig, this is probably the reason you want to get one. It just seems to work perfectly. So that's the thing. For something like Final Cut Pro, it's gonna work perfectly. Now I will say that if you don't have an RX 580 installed or something, a discrete GPU that's actually decent, you're going to run into more issues. But for me personally, for right now, this is just fine. So yeah, let's get back to the video.
Now, I do want to say with the editing of this video, I probably would not edit anything higher than 4K. If you're trying to edit like 8K video or something like that, it's probably not going to run well. And if you're trying to do really, really intense things like color correction, I probably wouldn't recommend it either. And that's the thing, is that while I did say it's a good editing rig, and that might be the reason why you want to buy it, I feel like for CapCut and stuff like that, the normal Windows PC or any old Mac would probably be just as fine. So that's the thing. Um, I'm running CapCut and I'm editing some 1080p video and some 4K video, and I said it ran fine. But like I said, is it worth 300 bucks just to run CapCut? That is something that you need to know.
Okay, and so the last thing we have about the usability is actually the upgradability of the machine. So this is obviously the Mac Pro right here. And how you take off the side panel is there's a little thing right here that you can just lift up, and then you can just pull the side panel right off like so. So that's pretty cool. And inside you have a couple of things. So first off, you have your hard drives. This is what a hard drive looks like. They are numbered. So this one is number 3, and you can put a 3.5-inch hard drive in here. And you also can put SSDs. Like, for example, I'm not going to take it out, but that is an SSD right there. And there's a 3D printed mount, or you can buy one on Amazon to fit it. It's up to you, and these just slide back into place. Now, number 2 has an Apple hard drive in it. So this is actually the one that came with the machine. It's a 1 terabyte, and it's pretty simple. We just put it in like that. It's all installed. And then you just flip that once the side panel's on. Now, we're going to talk about the CPU and RAM. If I pull this and this, I can pull it out. So let me do that real quick. Here's the tray. Here's some RAM right here that we can take a nice look at. This is half-size eMCC RAM, and this is what they use in servers. These are, I believe, 8 gigabytes sticks each, so we will just kind of put that back in like so, hopefully. Like that. And also we have one Xeon in here, so we have the quad core Xeon and the 32 gigs of RAM, but you can get up to 12 cores and 6 threads on 2 different CPUs if you have that tray. And that is kind of one of the nice things about this. So Xeon and RAM, and it can just pop out. So I believe back in the day, instead of you upgrading it, what they wanted you to do is just buy a whole new tray. But why would you do that? Because you could just make your own for cheaper. And actually, that's not a really hard upgrade to do. Also, on top of that, we have our RX 580 here, which I guess I can pull out. It's not that bad. It's going to be a little dark for you. I apologize for the camera work on this video. This is not very good. But we can just pull it out. Hopefully. Here's our RX 580. So that just proves to you how upgradable this machine really is. I believe you can even take out the optical drive. And yeah, so anyways, guys, that for me is probably one of the biggest reasons why you'd want to purchase this machine. It is just built really well, and I really do like it. So it is a big plus in my book. So now let's talk about, is this actually worth your hard-earned cash? Alright, so now we're going to end off this video, and I'm going to say whether or not I would recommend buying this. So first off, we need to talk about the cost of the machine that we've kind of brought up a couple times in the video. So I paid about 300 bucks. The baseline Mac Pro for me with the 32 gigabytes of memory and about the quad-core Xeon, that cost me 150 bucks on eBay. But the RX 580 cost me about 100, and I needed an SSD and some couple extra things, so that was about 150 bucks on top of that. That was about 300 bucks, right? So for 300 bucks, you could get a new Chromebook, or not, did I say Chromebook? Sorry, a Windows PC, a mid-range to low-end Windows PC. You could get a baseline iPad. You could get most of the way to a used M1 Mac Mini, and that's kind of the thing. An iPad or a used M1 Mac Mini is probably going to be way better. Like, that's where I feel like this machine, the Mac Pro, is going to be failing. Because, honestly, like, it's pointless. I mean, it runs macos Mojave. It requires a lot of work, which is annoying. And it's just, even if you want to open core it and do macos Ventura or something, like, that's just a lot of work. An M1 Mac Mini, it would get almost the same performance. It's up to date with Apple. It's tinier. It's less power efficient. I mean, it's more power efficient, sorry. And it's just easier to use, I think. And an iPad, I mean, come on. It's an iPad. It's running CapCut just like the Mac. And, I mean, come on. You gotta admit, like, iPads nowadays, they're pretty capable. So that's the thing. Can it edit 4K video? Yes. If you could find one for about, maybe 150 bucks or so, get it. But don't like expect anything amazing. And if you're an Apple collector, I get it. If you want a weekend project to do, yeah, this is good, especially if you want to put a GPU in it. But as a daily driver, I would personally not do it. I think it's got too many issues, especially when you're setting it up. And yeah, that's my opinions on it. So yeah, if you're a collector or you just really want to get it, go for it. But if you want a daily driver as a YouTube editing rig, this also might be a good option, but only for about 150 bucks or less. And that's not even including the graphics card. So I feel like an M1 Mac Mini that's used for about 400, which is just 100 bucks more, or about an iPad, which you can find for down to 200 for the new models. Get that. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching, and bye.